going to get started tonight. We got a special guest, our first guest on Dynamic Discussions, Coach Mark Asanovich, multi-year NFL strength coach and one of the leaders in concussion, head, neck training, and research. On behalf of Tammy and Kurt Tambernino, our production crew of James and Tammy, we always appreciate you guys signing on and you women signing on for our next hour. Here's how it's going to go today. I'm going to turn it over to Coach. Coach has about a 30-minute presentation that he's going to roll through for us and educate us on his discussions on concussion and head and neck training. And then we are going to do a live demo on Coach's head and neck isolator, which is one of the most unique neck pieces I've seen because he talks about two positions of the head, neck nods and neck tilts, or head nods and head tilts, that most people don't discuss. And I've been doing a lot of neck research, so it's very much resonated with me. So I'm excited to go through the demos. It has not been rehearsed. He's going to take me through like I'm a first timer in the weight room. And then Coach will go through our Q&As and then we'll wrap it up. So from here on out, here we are. Without further ado, Coach Mark Asanovich.
Thank you, Coach. It's always an honor and very humbling for me to have the opportunity to talk to respected colleagues, coaches, and friends. So I'd like to start out by thanking Joe Ken and the ownership and staff at Dynamic Fitness and Strength for giving this very important topic a voice. Let me go ahead and share the screen here. Whoop, it's this one. There we go. Give me a thumbs up if everybody can see the presentation. Okay, very good. What I would like to do tonight is inspire change. Oh, this one isn't working now. No, it's got to be this. Over here. I'll go right here.
Want me to change this one?
Yes. So Simon Sinek says that to inspire action, and that's what I want to do tonight. I want to inspire action. You have to first start with the why. As strength coaches, what is our why? Have you ever asked yourself that question? So let me help you fill in the blanks. As a strength and conditioning professional, my primary why, and I'll repeat that, my primary why is to protect my players from the risk of sport. Now, I want that to sink in for a while, because in a multi-billion-dollar win-at-all-costs sports-dominant culture, in my opinion, I think many have forgotten our highest calling. Now, that's a lot to wrap your mind around, and I can hear many of you out there going, whoa, slow down, wait a minute, Mark. Isn't ensuring the health and safety and welfare of our athletes the obvious and universal why? Where's all this forgetting our highest calling coming from? So it's time to get real, strength coaches. Case in point, in a 2017 commentary written by the legendary Oklahoma head athletic trainer for years, Scott Anderson, he entitled his commentary, NSCA Football Offseason Training, Unanswered Prayers, a Prayer Answered. In it, he says, since 2000, 33 NSCA football players have died in sport, 27 non-traumatic deaths, and 6 traumatic deaths. On average, that's 2 NCAA football players dying per season. He goes on to say, collegiate football's dirty little secret is that we are killing our players. Strength coaches get this, not in competition, almost never in practice, and rarely because of trauma, but primarily because of non-traumatic causes in off-season sessions, allegedly to enhance performance. He concludes by saying, the obsessive pursuit of winning at all costs supersedes the health and welfare of athletes. Now, if that doesn't get your attention, let me refer to the next slide. In the 2019 annual meeting of the American Orthopedic Society Sports Medicine 2019 annual meeting, Dr. Barry Bowden exposed the high school football's dirty little secret. And you can advance it one. Stating that on average, 20 high school football players die every year of non-traumatic deaths. The 3 common denominators in the non-traumatic deaths were, advance it please, there we go. They were supervised by the football coach and or strength and conditioning coach. They were irrationally intense workouts and or punishment drills. And number 3, the medical response was inadequate. So he concluded that the majority of deaths occurred not in the regular season, but in the month of August. So he concluded that conditioning-related fatalities are preventable by establishing standards in workout design, holding coaches and strength and conditioning coaches accountable, ensuring compliance with current policies, and allowing athletic healthcare providers complete authority over medical decisions. Still not convinced? This is a CDC study that looked at strength training related injuries that presented to US emergency departments. It concluded that from 1990 to 2007, there were 970,801 weight training injuries nationwide in US hospitals with 24-hour emergency care. This is a 48% increase in overall weight training injuries during this time span. And to that, I would add that the percentage is probably higher since they only looked at hospitals that had 24-hour emergency care. And you know as well as I that there were probably injuries that were unreported. As a strength and conditioning professional, I'm both saddened and appalled by these numbers. And given that scrutiny, I'd say that all strength coaches, including myself, need to take a step back and take a good look into the mirror and reflect upon what our major priority is. Because from where I'm sitting, ensuring the health and safety and welfare of our athletes is not as obvious and universal as we once thought. So I'll repeat where I began. As a strength and conditioning professional, our why above all else is to protect the players from the risks of sport. It is for that reason that I entitled my presentation, Protecting the Integrity of Sports. And to that, I could add, protecting the integrity of the strength coaching profession by protecting those who play sport. Now, when you analyze risk logically, you have to start with the most catastrophic risk. And the most catastrophic risk in sport is injury to your brain or injury to your spinal cord. Because they are the most catastrophic risks, they have to be our highest priority. But are they? Is the neurological health of your athletes your highest priority? Now, understand that highest priority means that if you only had time to train one body segment, it would be the head and neck segment. Not the glutes, not the chest, not the core. So let me ask you right now, what are you doing in your programming to protect your players' brains and spinal cords? We'll get back to that. Concussion, one before that. Even the word evokes fear, frenzy, frustration. Concussion just might be the most intimidating word in sport today. Concussion, so there's no misinformation, is a brain injury that results in brain damage and brain dysfunction. Concussion, not to be confused with subconcussion, which also is a brain injury that results in brain damage. However, because it is not as severe, it does not have clinical symptoms. And although the spotlight is on concussions, current research tells us that the accumulated damage from subconcussive blows are more likely to lead to neurodegenerative disease than the 3 to 5 concussions you have over the course of your career. So let's go right there. Next one.
This one,
Yeah, and I'm trying to find this too.
right there.
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay. The mechanism of concussion is a rapid acceleration followed by a rapid deacceleration of the head, the result of which transmits linear and rotational forces to the brain. As the brain encounters this loading, it forcefully stretches and elongates. This results in shearing and tearing of the individual axons and neurons at a microscopic level. The shearing results in mechanical damage to the cytoskeleton of the brain cell. The technical name for this is diffuse axonal injury. As those axons are sheared so violently, it releases tau proteins into the extracellular spaces of the brain. If the tau does not dissipate, the tau can clump together and become entangled around blood vessels and other brain cells. Once this process is set in motion, it's like pouring cement down drain pipes. The brain can literally be strangled from the inside out. This etiology can result in a constellation of tauopathic neurodegenerative disease. Because of the jello-like composition of the brain, it is very, very vulnerable to these impact forces. So what's the solution? As is the case with any injury, to understand how to mitigate risk, you must first understand the mechanism of the injury. To answer this question, we must look at the anatomy of the head and neck segment. From this schematic, you can clearly see that all positioning and movement of the head is dictated by neck muscles. According to Kevin Guskowitz, the neck muscles resist movement against externally applied forces to stabilize the head during impact. What does that mean? Upon impact, a stronger neck slows down the movement of the head, which slows down the movement of the brain, which thereby reduces the mechanism of concussion. An intuitive concept when you understand the biomechanics. Unfortunately, because it is not well understood, it is not well prescribed in most mainstream strength programs. So by strengthening the musculature of the head and neck segment, we slow down the head on impact to protect the brain. But how many of you know that by strengthening the musculature of the head and neck segment, we also protect the spinal cord? CBS News reported that there are 140,000 annual mild to severe spinal cord injuries in high school football. The NCAA reports that there are 1,000 annual spinal cord injuries in collegiate sports. The CDC, let's go back, there we go, says that of those 141,000 spinal injuries, 5 to 12 will result in paralysis. To understand how to prevent spinal cord injury, again, you must understand the mechanism of injury. So let me introduce you to Dr. Joseph Torg, our nation's leading expert, to explain the mechanism of spinal cord injury.
Our research demonstrates that when a football player ends up paralyzed, it is not just an accident. These are not freak injuries. For every effect, there is a cause. There is a reason why this happens. These injuries result from an axial load being placed on the cervical spine. That is, the spine and spinal cord are literally crushed between the player's head and his body. Normally, when an individual stands up straight, the cervical spine has a normal curve to it, as demonstrated by this diagram. But when an individual lowers his head and bends his neck slightly forward, the cervical spine is straightened. The spine then becomes what is called a segmented column. If force is applied to the top of the head when the neck is in this position, it is called axial loading. If a force is applied to the top of the head with the spine straightened, as in spear tackling, the spinal column cannot dissipate the force through controlled motion. Instead, the continued momentum of the body will result in compression of the spinal elements. If these forces are greater than the elastic capabilities of the spinal segment will buckle. The result is a fracture and/or dislocation. This principle is vividly demonstrated in this injury model. As we see, the head stops, the momentum of the body continues, and the spine is literally crushed between the two. Axial loading is a mechanism where the player makes contact with the top or crown of his helmet. The head is acutely decelerated, the momentum of the body continues, and the spinal column and spinal cord are literally crushed between the decelerated head and the continued momentum of the body.
Okay, so we didn't get the complete video, but. So how do you prevent axial loading? There are two very effective risk management strategies. And the first is seeing what you hit. That's right, heads up tackling. By keeping the head up, you maintain the normal lordotic curve in the cervical spine. When the head is up, the geometry of the curve spreads out the impact forces much more effectively and prevents axial loading. When the head is up, the geometry of the curve, when the head is down, the cervical spine is straightened and increases the tackler's risk for compression injury from axial loading. So heads up tackling is very effective in preventing spinal cord injury. However, it is very ineffective in preventing traumatic brain injury. The second best risk management strategy for preventing spinal cord injury is head and neck strengthening. Science tells us that when muscle is strengthened, there is a systemic effect on the body, meaning there are collateral adaptations that occur in sync with the muscular adaptations. Again, science tells us that when muscle gets stronger, bones get stronger, ligaments and tendons get thicker and stronger. The shearing and the sheathing around the joint becomes thicker and denser. Therefore, as the neck musculature is strengthened, the cervical vertebrae get thicker and stronger. This increases the structural integrity of the cervical column. Increasing the structural integrity of the cervical spine, which houses the spinal cord, will decrease the chance of spinal column compression and spinal cord injury. So the question becomes, since head and neck strengthening is essential in mitigating concussion and spinal cord injury, what is the best practice for training cervical muscles? I have a couple of teaching points I'd like to make before I get into the actual protocol. First, this picture infers that brains can get stronger, or at least they can protect themselves. It can't. The brain is called a post-mitotic organ, meaning brain cells are incapable of undergoing mitosis. In other words, brain cells are incapable of regenerating or repairing themselves after injury. Like Dr. Warren Sapp says, brain injuries are like amputations. They are for life. That's why after suffering a stroke, the damage is permanent and irreversible. So because the brain can't protect itself, it is critical that we do everything we can to protect the brain. My second point is, where do you think I got my training protocol? Well, I'll tell you where I didn't go. I didn't go Google it and pick and choose exercises that I believed would work. I didn't go to the biggest guy in the gym and ask for his advice. And I didn't go to the University of Alabama and see what their football team was doing. Rather, this protocol, like all best practices, is based on the following criteria. 1, scientific prospective study. 2, expert consensus. And 3, lack of collateral risk. So let's take a look at the valid and reliable studies that have been done. One of the most compelling prospective studies was published by Dawn Comstock and her cohort at the University of Colorado School of Public Health. Sample included 6,700 male and female high school student athletes, representing 6 sports, over 25 states, consisting of 51 high schools. Prior to the start of the 2010-2011 academic school year, they went in and measured neck circumferences of these individuals, and they measured neck strength isometrically. They took isometric neck extension, flexion, and lateral strength measures. Using the high school sports-related injury surveillance study, they tracked injury outcomes. After adjusting for gender in sport, overall neck strength was the most significant predictor of concussion. Their results indicated that for every pound of improved neck strength, it reduced concussion risk by 5%. Concussed athletes demonstrated 11 to 22% reduction in neck strength compared to non-concussed athletes. In addition to this landmark study, the body of evidence continues to grow in support of this evidence-based practice. Although time prohibits from going through each study, I wanted you to see the overwhelming evidence. If you'd like a copy of these references, we have them attached to the link in the chat and you can go in and take a look at the references yourself. But again, the evidence certainly is there. So best practices are based on the evidence. They are also based on consensus. Meaning, as professionals, we must take a look at what the evidence says and also what the experts are saying. Then we must take all reasonable and logical steps to ensure compliance with those recommendations. So let's take a look at what the experts are saying. Comstock and her cohort state that neck strengthening programs should be the primary prevention mechanism for concussion. Dr. Robert Cantu, neurologist and our nation's eminent expert on traumatic brain injury, listen to his comment to the question, if helmets can't prevent concussion, what can we do?
You should be developing neck strength, and you should be working on your neck muscle with a resistive exercise program if you're going to play a contact collision sport. Because the stronger the neck is, as long as you see the blow coming, the less chance you're going to have for concussion. You should be developing.
Dr. Chris Nowinski, CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, says, if your neck is weak, impact goes directly into your 15-pound head. It, meaning neck strengthening, should be a focal point of any training program. Dr. William Meehan, director of Sports Concussion Clinic at Boston Children's University, states, neck strengthening the musculature of the neck reduces sports-related concussion. University of Pittsburgh's Dr. Mickey Collins says that one of the best ways to prevent concussions, in his words, is actually having a strong neck. University of North Carolina's Dr. Kevin Guskowitz says that by improving neck strength, it will decrease movement of the head during concussive impact. Well, let's hear from him on what we need to do proactively.
We also need to place more emphasis on cervical neck strengthening. We believe this is one of the reasons why women are more susceptible to concussion than men. When we compare it in sports where the rules are similar, such as soccer, there is a higher incidence of concussion in women's soccer compared to men's soccer. And we think it has to do with, in general, neck musculature.
Michael Stone and his colleagues summed it up best way back in 1997 when they said training programs for cervical neck musculature will improve the body's natural defense mechanism. Finally, neurosurgeon Dr. Henry Elsner says that an extensive neck strengthening program is common sense. And given the evidence and the consensus by experts, would you agree? In fact, neck strengthening is intuitive, and Dr. Elsner says it is commonsensical. Best practice for practitioners must be evidence-based, consensus-based, and finally, it must lack collateral risk. To determine collateral risk, you must answer this question. Is there any downside to having stronger head and neck muscles? Obviously not. That is, as long as your strength training protocols are safe and sound. There you have it. Given the evidence, given the experts, and given the lack of risk in a court of law, if you are a professional and you are not following best practices, in this case, strengthening your head and neck, you are culpable, you are negligent, and you are guilty of not acting in the best interests of your players. So let's take a look at what best practices in strengthening the head and neck muscles are. The protocol consists of 6 exercises, 4 exercises that target and isolate the cervical muscles of the neck, and 2 exercises that target and isolate the anterior and posterior capital muscles of the head. By completing these 6 exercises, you will directly isolate and train all muscles of the head and neck segment that are responsible for head movement. Let me point out that this is not rocket science. We know that to strengthen human striated muscle, we must apply progressive resistance over time against the function of the muscle. So if you want to strengthen your bicep muscle, you must apply progressive resistance against elbow flexion. The same holds true for the muscles of the head and neck. There is nothing complex or sophisticated about these exercises. They are very simple, they are very safe, and if done correctly, they are very productive. What is important is the order in which you sequence these exercises. That is, you must alternate neck exercises with head exercises. Let me explain. The movement that distinguishes head muscles from neck muscles is exactly 30 degrees, 10 degrees of flexion and 20 degrees of extension. This 30-degree movement by the head does not require activation of the neck muscles. So to maximize development, each muscle group must be trained as 2 distinct muscular units: the muscles that move the head and the muscles that move the neck. Even though the head and neck muscles work together in sync, when the larger muscles of the neck are fresh, they will override the smaller muscles of the head. Therefore, to better isolate those small muscles of the head, we must first pre-fatigue the larger muscles. We must first pre-fatigue the larger muscles to better maximize the training of the smaller muscles. This sequencing technique is called pre-exhaustion, and it's very effective in that it forces the smaller muscles to work after the larger muscles have been momentarily fatigued. So let's watch how to properly execute each of the exercises in the protocol.
Set both upper controls to the end position for neck. Slide out the back pad for firm support in the seated position. The head pad should be centered on the back of your head. If it is too high or if it is touching your neck, raise or lower the seat accordingly. If needed, use the adjustable foot pegs. Slide the appropriate weight onto the machine. Sit down facing left, sit in the middle of the seat fully upright. Hold on to the hand grips in front of you. Start by flexing your head down all the way so your chin is against your chest. With your back fully supported against the back pad, smoothly rotate your head backwards against the head pad to the fully extended position. Use a smooth, controlled motion. Push back all the way until your eyes are looking straight up. Pause and hold this position briefly. Then in a controlled motion, lower the head to the starting position. Be sure not to bounce or jerk. Keep the motion smooth, controlled, and fluid.
Okay, so the video is a little bit behind the soundtrack right now, but when the larger muscles of the neck extensors are pre-fatigued, we can now isolate the smaller head extensors. Oh, wait. So the lifter should take little time as possible between the exercise to minimize recovery of the neck extensors and to maximize isolation of the head extensors. And because the video is a little bit behind, when we get to the end, we'll be able to show you when Joe and I go through a little bit better there.
Sit in the same position as before, facing left. This time, set the upper control to the H and HT positions for head and head tilt. Instead of holding the hand grips out in front of you, reach down and grip two handles below your seat, pulling them upward. As before, center the back of your head against the head pad. Begin the head tilt by smoothly tilting your head back, rotating your chin upward. The machine will limit your head to rotate back 25 degrees. At the end of the head rotation, briefly continue pushing firmly against the pad for maximum muscle contraction. Then, in a controlled motion, lower the head back in the starting position. Again, be sure not to bounce or jerk. Keep the motion smooth and controlled.
Remember, to strengthen a muscle, resistance must be applied through the functional range of the muscle. The function of the head extensors is to move or tilt the head 20 degrees. The first time I did this exercise was on a Friday. And all weekend I kept telling my wife, I think I have a headache. And I never have had headaches. In fact, it wasn't the headache at all. It was the suboccipits were so tender and sore that it felt like a headache.
Smoothly and deliberately tuck the chin downwards in a rotary fashion to where the chin touches the chest. To exit the exercise, grasp the work arm. Remove your face from the pad, slide your head to the side, and lower the work arm to its resting position.
Once again, the lifter should take as little time as possible between exercises to minimize recovery of the neck flexors and to maximize isolation of the head flexors.
Grip the handles to stabilize the upper torso. Initiate the movement by pressing the forehead against the pad while nodding the head downwards. The range limiter will stop movement at 10 degrees. Briefly push into the pad, then lower the work arm under control back to the starting position.
Of all the exercises in the protocol, the nod draws the biggest scrutiny, since many have had a hard time believing that 10 degrees makes a difference. That is, until you try it. This is one of those exercises that literally must be experienced to be appreciated. The first time I did this exercise, because I had never isolated the head flexors, it almost felt like I was choking.
Initiate the movement by slowly and deliberately pressing the head against the pad to where the pad touches the opposite shoulder. Face the opposite direction to train the other side of the neck.
So there you have it. Nothing complex, nothing sophisticated, 6 very basic, simple, and highly effective exercise to protect your athletes from traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury. So what does science say about head and neck strengthening? The proof is in understanding the physics. Players change, rules change, and advance in equipment design change, but the laws of physics that govern sport remain constant. So let's take a look at how the laws of physics establish beyond a reasonable doubt an association between increased neck strength and decreased impact forces to the brain. Increased mass to decrease acceleration. This is Newton's second law of motion. It says that if we increase mass, we will decrease head acceleration and thus impact forces to the brain. By increasing the mass of the neck, we can slow down head acceleration and reduce the forces transferred to the brain. In other words, the mathematical equivalent of your neck is a cylinder. Physics says that if we increase the circumference of your cylinder, say by neck training, it will become a better energy dissipator, meaning it will absorb impact forces much more effectively. So if two equal impact forces strike two different size cylinders, the larger cylinder will absorb more force and less will be transferred to the brain. Likewise, the smaller cylinder will result in the head moving farther and faster, resulting in more force being transferred to the brain and increasing the risk of concussion. To slow down the head on impact, we must increase neck stiffness. To illustrate this principle, let me refer you to a 2007 NFL-funded study where researchers analyzed game video of 31 head impacts that resulted in a concussion. They looked at both helmet-to-helmet and helmet-to-ground collisions for both the striking and the struck players. Then they recreated those same hits through mannequin reenactments in a laboratory. The independent variable that was used was the hybrid 3 model neck component. To stimulate an increase in the neck strength and girth, stiffer hybrid 3 neck models were used on the mannequins. The results demonstrated stronger necks reduce head displacement, velocity, and acceleration to the 4th power. Increase slosh to dampen the force mechanism. Now, what the heck is slosh? The term slosh refers to the body's fluid dynamics. How many of you know that muscle is almost 80% water? Why is this so significant? Because water serves as a dampening agent. In other words, it absorbs forces. Let me explain. That's not playing. Here, let's go back. Well, I apologize, this video isn't working, but what I did is I took a water bucket, 5-gallon water bucket, and I hit it empty with a sledgehammer. And obviously there was a lot of movement to the water bucket. Then I filled it up with water and I hit it with the same sledgehammer at the same force. And obviously the movement was considerably less. And the reason was because the water absorbed the force in the water bucket. More muscle, there's more water. More water, there's more slosh. More slosh, there is more force absorbed in the neck and less force transferred to the brain. Upon impact, the added water absorbs the forces like a shock absorber. Like any good shock absorber, forces are absorbed and not transferred. So if more forces are absorbed in the musculature of the neck, there'll be less forces translated to the brain. So ultimately, in strengthening the muscles of the neck, we are building a bioshock absorber, or if you will, we're upgrading the head suspension system. So coaches, we have the science. We have the protocol. We have the machine. What's your excuse? When you understand the science, you can't bury your head in the sand any longer. It should be very evident. Head and neck strength training will prevent concussion and spinal cord injury. It's a no-brainer. Every day, young people are exposed to brain damage on fields and rinks across the country. Every day, 20 veterans die from suicide. What are we waiting for? How many more have to die? Broken, bankrupt, burdens to their families, burdens to the healthcare system, before we realize that something as obvious and logical as head and neck strength training is essential in protecting the brain and spinal cord. At the very least, their deaths must teach us that we can do a better job of protecting the future generations. The reality is we cannot predict the number, nor the magnitude, nor the direction of concussive impacts prior to his taking the field. So as a strength coach, I must utilize all best practices to take all the logical steps to protect his most valuable resource and our country's most valuable resource, our youth brains. Remember, the brain can't protect itself, so prevention is critical. Back in the day, we couldn't see the tangible scars of concussion. Concussions were viewed as out of sight, out of mind. Concussions were the orthopedic equivalent of a stubbed toe, a source of humor, and in many instances, a badge of honor. We used to use euphemisms like ding, getting your bell rung, or seeing stars to describe this invisible injury. Compounding the problem is the fact that the brain doesn't have pain proprioceptors, so you can't feel the damage that's been done. We now know that it's not a ding. It's not about seeing stars, and certainly it isn't a joke. It is, in fact, your brain. The human brain is the most complex organ in the body. It consists of an intricate network of 86 billion neurons and are supported by 85 billion glial cells. Putting it in computer terms, the brain is your operating system. It controls all cognition and all physical systems. The brain is where your intellect resides, along with your moods, emotions, thoughts, and perceptions. The brain defines us as human beings. It is your identity. Some would say it is the seat of your soul. Suffice it to say, what and who we are is a product of your brain. When the brain goes, you cease to be. You are born with a finite number of brain cells. You can only lose them. You cannot create new ones. A hip, a knee, an ankle, when injured, can be rehabbed or even replaced. You can live without an appendix, a gallbladder, a spleen, or a kidney. The brain is irreplaceable. The only rational course of action is prevention. Neurological health must be our number one priority. With the stakes so high, We can't continue to live in the darkness of our past. Most Americans still don't know, don't see concussions for the traumatic brain injuries that they are. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. We can make a difference. The information presented today has the power to save lives and ease suffering, but it can't stay confined within this podcast. We need to educate athletes, parents, coaches, and all other stakeholders in youth sports. It is only through education that society will fully accept the reality of head and neck strengthening to save brains and spinal cords for the future generations. Like Martin Luther King, I have a dream. I believe we can make sports safer. I believe we can do a better job protecting our players. I believe that strength coaches are the first line of defense. And I believe that strengthening the head and neck above all else will make this a reality. Finally, if you're not going to justify training the neck on the grounds of integrity and it's the right thing to do, consider this. American tackle football was associated with $1.35 billion in healthcare costs from 2010 to 2013. The direct financial healthcare cost of a single football-related concussion was $800. This does not include the indirect costs of missed school or work or long-term cognitive outcomes. The bottom line is, in a cost-effective analysis regarding the absolute risk reduction, would suggest that the best use of financial resources is to invest in head and neck strengthening. Consider a football hypothetical. To reduce concussions, many uninformed coaches choose to upgrade helmets. An upgrade from the Riedel Speed Flex to the Vicus 01 is $525. According to the literature, the absolute risk reduction by making this change is 3.3%. Therefore, it would require 33 helmet upgrades to prevent one concussion. Thus, the cost to prevent one concussion equates to $17,325. Contrary to popular belief, the $17,000 spent to upgrade helmets isn't the best allocation of financial resources. Instead, the best use of financial resources would be to purchase 5 or 6 head and neck machines at a cost of $10,750. That way you'd save $7,000 and it would provide 100% risk reduction to every player using the machine. In the end, you save money, you save brains, and you save spinal cords. So let me ask you again, what are you doing in your programming right now to protect players' brains and spinal cords? Will your players say that you did everything humanly possible to prevent head and spine injuries, or are they going to say you did nothing? So I'd like to thank you for your attention today. It's my hope that the information has inspired you to act and empowers you to set the course of your programming. So what questions do you have? I guess we can take questions now. Okay.
And then you got these two right here.
Oh, okay. So 2 of the questions from the chat were, what does a prudent, productive plan to implement strength training for the head and neck and jaw look like? And how will it allow them to progress from middle school through to high school and the university? So in answering that question, Jeff, it's what we talked about in the protocol, following those 6 exercises, making sure that you're sequencing your your neck exercises with your head exercise so that you pre-fatigue the larger muscles of the neck so that you can better isolate the smaller muscles of the head. Question 2, where does your neck machine fit into the plan, and what potential barriers does your neck machine design overcome and allow for user-friendly interface? Again, these aren't sophisticated exercises by any means. As I said before, to train human striated muscle, you must put progressive resistance against the function of muscle. So if you want to increase bicep strength, you have to put resistance against elbow flexion. It would be the same for neck extensor strength. If you wanted to increase the neck flexion strength, you'd have to put resistance against neck flexion. Same for extension and lateral flexion. And that's what the machine does. The thing that distinguishes this machine from other neck machines is that you can also train your head muscles. And it makes it idiot-proof because there's a range limiter on there that will stop you at exactly 10 degrees of flexion, and it will stop you at 20 degrees of extension. So you can isolate the head flexors and the head extensors. If you're in a setting that you have limited time, what are your go-to movements to train the neck, and how would you space them out if you only have 2 or 3 days? A really good question. There are 6 exercises in the protocol. So if I'm training 2 times a week, I would take 3 of the exercises. I would probably do flexion, head nod, and then lateral flexion right. And then on the next day, I would do neck flexion or extension, head extension, and lateral flexion left. I would just break the protocol up into 3 exercises. If I was going 3 times a week, I would take 2 exercises. I'd do the flexion and the nod. Then on the second day, I would go lateral flexion right and left. And then the third day, I would do the neck extension and then the head tilt. I guess my main point there is you don't have to do all 6 exercises in a single workout.
If you have any more questions, you can fire them off in the chat. If not, somebody got a question? Steve.
I got a question for you, Mark. So when we lay out and design rooms, one of the biggest things that we usually are trying to determine when adding in the neck machine is when we're talking about laying out an entire room and we're trying to design the amount of weight that's needed. When we get to the neck machine, myself not having used it with a large number of athletes, have you found that there's a typical weighted amount that we should allot for when including a neck machine in a room? Like, make sure you order 200 pounds of weights to put through it. And we find that the majority of high school athletes typically use between a total weight of maybe, let's say 90 to 150 pounds. Or do you have any specific parameters of total weight amount that you would recommend stay at the neck machine, as well as when we determine that weight amount, do most athletes jump by 45 pounds or 25 pounds or 10 pounds? That way we make sure when we're designing the room, we allot for the correct amount of weight storage to be present at that machine.
Well, Steve, it's a good question, and I can only speak to the head and neck isolator, but you have to understand that their strength levels are going to vary from obviously the beginners and the more advanced trainers. So I've trained some high school girls that will just start off with a work arm, and then we can slowly build them up over time. But then I've had professional football players on there that can put 200 pounds on and do neck extension with that. And that's generally the highest I've seen on there. So it can really run the gamut depending upon whether you're training beginners or you're training more advanced people on the neck. And that would really go for any exercise too. Did that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, I think 200 pounds is probably the real number I was looking for. I'd rather just make sure I'm setting enough weight there to accommodate everybody. And I'm going to assume that maybe if we're putting 200 pounds there, it's probably best to allot for having 8 25s. That way we're getting the most, intensity range of that 200 pounds with easy loading. Because I know, I've put neck machines in places and we just throw 4 45s over there, but then you end up stealing from another part of the room to have the adjustability. So I think the way I'm seeing that answer is make sure we have a maximum of 200 pounds and then try and divvy that out equally across. So 8 25s at each neck machine is kind of the way I'm taking that.
Yeah.
I would add, Steve, I would tell you to add 2.5s, 5s, and 10s, because especially on some of those smaller movements, small increments of improvement, you're not going to be able to go from, even for neck flexion and extension, mine can be a 5-pound difference, very marginal. And, he's talking about high-end guys. I'm on this machine a couple of times, and you can get a lot done with 50 pounds, 55 and 52. 2.5 pound increments on typical 4-way necks is a big jump.
Yeah, you don't want to just have 25s. You can't progress somebody from 25 pounds and then add another 25 right up to 50. That would be just too much, too fast.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
And realize this, Steve, the guy that I had doing it for 200 pounds, he was like 6'7", 365. So you're not going to be training very many people in the high school that are, that have that size.
All right, so what we're going to do now is, again, I've messed with this myself, but Coach is going to walk me through to make sure my setup's right. And we're going to quickly go through a live demo of all 6 positions in the order that Coach had spoken about today in the presentation.
So the thing that distinguishes the head neck isolator from other neck machines is the fact that we put a range limiter on there for the head exercises. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to make it, for better term, we want to make it idiot-proof, so that you stop at 10 degrees and you stop exactly at 20 degrees, which is the range of those smaller head muscles. So first thing I'm going to do, everything we've done with this machine, we've done for isolation. So when Joe's going to do the back extension, again, we have to place resistance, progressive loads against neck extension. I'm going to get him in here and I'm going to line his seat up first so that he can comfortably have his head down with his chin against his chest, his hands out so that he's feeling comfortable and can go through the full range. So yeah, right now he's sitting too high. The pad is hitting here. So again, what we'd have to do is we'd have to adjust the seat down. And take your time, the first time going through this, to ascertain what your correct seat heights and back settings are. And then what I would do is I would record these numbers on their workout cards. So in subsequent workouts coming back, you'd always be able to set them at the appropriate height. Let's give that a shot. Chin against his chest. Do 1 rep. Let's see if the pad is hitting. How does that feel? It looks like the pad's hitting still. Maybe a little bit. Let's go down 1 more. And again, this may take, we didn't rehearse this at all today, so it may take a couple attempts to find the appropriate seat adjustment. Okay, so there he's going nice and controlled through the full range of motion. His back is supported against the back pad. His hands are on the handles. And you can see his reps are perfect, which you're probably not going to get when you first get somebody on there. It's easy training professional strength coaches, but again, you want to move nice and controlled. You want to avoid any type of momentum. Once the muscle is pre-fatigued, now we have a chance to isolate the smaller muscles of the head which are called the suboccipits. So let's say you hit a maximum effort there, coach. And now we're going to isolate, we're going to go 20 degrees. So on the machine, there's an N, which stands for neck exercises, and an H, which stands for head exercise. We're going to go there. This is only 20 degrees. I'm going to bring the range limiter down to where it says HT, standing for head tilt. And now the range limiter is set, so it will stop at exactly 20 degrees in the extension. Now, I don't want the trap involved in this exercise, and the trap will unless you put it on a stretch. So under the seat, there's a handle. And so he's going to be holding on to that handle, and then he's going to extend back to 20 degrees and push as hard as he can there, and then back to the neutral position right there. Don't go all the way down, just go back to neutral. Right there. Back to the neutral position. And now we're isolating, we've taken the traps out of it, we're isolating his head extensors. Okay, so when he fatigues the head extensors and the neck extensors, then we have to turn around and do the same thing for the neck flexors. So again, he will turn around. Now, are the seats the same from the extension and flexion? Sometimes, sometimes not. You may have to adjust it again. So to start neck flexion, he's going to start in the neutral position. You have to come down more. Okay. So he's going to start. Beginners like to slouch when they do this. I want them to sit all the way upright. And he's going to go from the neutral position. Whoops. We got to reset here. Hold on a second. I'll go back to N. Bring the range limiter up. And go. And just back to neutral. So full range for the neck flexors are from neutral all the way down till the chin goes to the chest. I think you actually need to come up, coach. Yeah. Yeah. Let's try one seat level higher. Okay, try that. There you go. So I like to use the back pad on this exercise too to stabilize the chest during this exercise. So again, it's hard for him to use any type of momentum. What we're doing here is we're pre-fatiguing his neck flexors now, so we can get at those little capitis muscles that are deep and do head flexion. So after he fatigues here, we're going to go to the head exercise adjustment bar. We're going to go down to 10 degrees. And this is it right here, from neutral to 10. And that's it. That's the functional range of the head flexors. Okay, good. Good, coach. Like I said before, that's the one I get the most scrutiny on, because people say 10 degrees range of motion, what does that do? Well, try it. Try it at the right weight, and you'll see and feel how that isolates in those head flexors. Okay, lateral flexion.
Everyone cross hands.
Nope, nope. Yes, what I do is let's brace with this arm. Brace with this arm, yep. Now, to pull this shoulder down, I just have the athlete put their hand under there. Otherwise, if they, I think if you really coached it up well, and you were very stoic and you said, we're not screwing around, this is what we're doing, and you supervise very good, maybe you could be effective in doing that. The problem is this: you can't quantify improvement by doing manual resistance. You can't see that they've gone from 50 pounds to 60 pounds in neck extension. So when an athlete concusses, I don't want them going back into play until they return to their baseline neck strengths before they were concussed. So if I know a player was, usually the protocol to go back into play is they get on aerobic equipment and they don't have symptoms and they pass their neurocognitive impact test, and the doctors say, okay, you're ready to go back in. And many times I'm going, no, he's not ready. He's 30 pounds weaker on his extension and 20 pounds weaker on his flexion. He's not ready to go back in. I have an objective measurement that's been quantified and measured. And then when he gets back to that level of strength, then I can put him back into competition. And you can't do that with manual resistance exercise. So is manual resistance effective? It can be, although I highly question it, because in doing this for over 40 years, I'm very good at manual resistance on the neck. But even I can't quantify how much improvement there is. So again, I think that being best practices, you need to quantify what you're doing in regards to best practices. So I have had some teams that'll buy like 3 machines because they bring in 100 people to the room at a time. And I'll say, well, you can do half the team on the machine and then half manual resistance. Then coming back the next time you train, you can put the people that train manually, they can go on the neck machine. And then the ones that are on the neck machine, they can do manuals. Okay, so you can work it that way too, so you can at least quantify the results you're getting.
Anybody else?
Good questions.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry, do you want to go? I just had a 2-part. Does it matter if you do the neck at the beginning or the end of the workout? And what kind of rep range are you looking for in that pre-exhaust to get the most out of the head musculature?
Well, again, we got to go back to the literature, and most of the literature that has been done on the neck strength training protocol uses one set of 10 to 12 repetitions, meaning that you're going to, in one set, find a weight where by the 12th repetition, the muscle's totally fatigued. Now, as strength coaches, we know that every protocol works if you can get the kids to work. So I would not have any problems with somebody doing 1 set, 2 sets, or 3 sets. But the problem is this: if you're trying to get through 2 or 3 exercises and you're doing 2 sets on top of it, you're really tying the machine up for a long period of time. So I would really, from an efficiency standpoint, recommend doing 1 set of 10 to 12 repetitions. Then when they can do the 12th repetition in good form, then like Joe said, you're incrementally bringing them up slowly over time. And I'm sorry, what was the second question you had?
Do you prefer to use it at the start of the workout or at the end? Or do you vary?
Great question. Well, as we said, it's our highest priority, right? So ideally, I want my athletes training their neck first when they are totally fresh and they're hitting it with maximum energy. I don't want them doing it at the end of the workout, because a lot of times at the end of the workout, they don't get there and it doesn't get done. But in an ideal situation, I want athletes training their neck first when they come in the room. We got another question. As a military member and high numbers of TBI, how do we sell the Army on head and neck training? Well, again, all you have to do is go to the VA, and it's not just people that have been exposed to blast exposure that need to train their neck. You take a look, go into most VAs, and you have these fighter pilots of high performance machines moving their necks around when they're pulling all these G's. And they really have a problem with their neck musculature right now. So how do you sell it? It's cost effective for the military. So again, what we're going to have to do, and what I'm trying to do right now, is put together some costs that we're looking at the VA, and then the cost for just doing preventative work. And the preventative work is going to be a better financial investment for them.
Anybody else?
Coach,
Okay,
yeah, I
well,
just had a question.
where are we? Austin, hit it.
Yeah, I was just wondering, would you implement this with all positions, and more specifically, I guess, like all contact sports, or just specific?
All sports, regardless of sport.
Yeah, in fact, Austin, the biggest number of concussions occurring in the United States are falls and motor vehicle accidents. So I tell people, if you walk or if you operate a motor vehicle, guess what? You should be training your neck musculature.
There's also research out there that talks about strengthening the neck musculature as it refers to correct posture too. So there's a lot of tie-ins with what goes on to it with not even head trauma, but just posture in general. And then especially in this day and age of text neck and slouched seating positions, there's just a whole bunch of positives by training the neck for any athlete, regardless of impact or not.
Sweet, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. Again, we appreciate your guys' time, and we thank Coach Asanovich for spending some time with us here today at the headquarters. And again, on behalf of our owners, Kurt and Tammy, production crew, James Peters, the man, the myth, the legend. We'll see you guys next month. Thanks again for joining us.